Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm Zscaler from ZK Research, and I'm here in Melbourne at ZenithLive 2025. This is Zscaler's APJ event. Right. And I'm here with Eric Swift, GM of ANZ. Eric, first time on with me. And so before we get into some of the content, just a quick introduction to yourself and what you do at Zscaler.
Great. Well, again, as you mentioned, Eric Swift, I run Zscaler Australia, New Zealand. I've done that for about the last year and a few months. Came to Australia about 9 years ago, working for Microsoft and then ServiceNow, leading enterprise business and then the
big companies.
Business. Yeah. And had been at Microsoft for 20 years prior to that. Yeah. So long history in working on transformative technologies and the cloud transformation there. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, decided to make the move to Zscaler.
Oh, good for you. And well, you know, I like coming to this region because it's an interesting region because everybody thinks of APJC, but really ANZ is its own unique thing, and so is Singapore, so is Japan. And so just from an overall market perspective, just talk about some of the trends here in ANZ and how that's really shaping customers' cyber strategy.
Yeah. I'd say New Zealand thinks they're also very different
yes.
than Australia, but definitely the region, all of the different countries across APJ, very, very diverse. The unique thing about the Australian market is early adopter of technology. They're usually fast followers on the technology. Mm-hmm. And so with move to cloud, mobile technologies, and now inline security cloud for security, they've been some of the earliest adopters of the technology and very forward thinking in that regard. And so you get that opportunity as a technology vendor to bring the latest capabilities globally and get a lot of uptick in adoption.
Yeah. Now, I enjoyed your keynote this morning.
Thank you.
And I thought one of the, there was a couple of things you're talking about. One was the trust gap, which is, I think, a relatively new term for Zscaler. I know Zero Trust, of course, has been a big part of the go-to-market for a while. But talk about what the trust gap is. And I think one of the other interesting things you said was that security can now be a competitive differentiator.
Yeah. So
tie the trust gap to that.
Well, I'll step back one step first and I'll go right to that. Okay. I hear from CISOs across the region that over the last several years, they've been getting increased budgets in order to invest in cybersecurity. But at this point, the threats are increasing. You know, AI supercharged threats, creating multiple areas of attack.
It's crazy.
And that's created this situation where the more you spend, if you don't change your approach, you're not going to address the actual issue. And so they're looking at how it's more than just do more with less. You have to take a different approach. And we found that complexity is number one enemy in security. You know, and how then do you get organizations to simplify their operations and become more secure so that they can protect the critical data and the assets that they hold for their constituents? And so that's the how. What we're trying to do is address that trust gap that exists. People are aware that these cyber threats are increasing, and they're worried. They're worried about their data. They're worried about their money in their bank account. They're worried about their health information. And they want to make sure that these organizations are treating this sensitive data and these assets with the stewardship and care that you would expect.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that you said do more with less, because cyber has always been spend more, and ultimately actually get less because it gets more complicated.
Yeah, raise the walls higher and higher, and then you find out that, people are inside. Okay, then build walls inside. Yeah. Okay, then make sure you limit the access point, and you just keep going on and on. There's a joke in the industry that nobody's ever finished a microsegmentation project because it's so complicated.
That's true.
Yeah, it's so complicated, and you end up just bypassing all your policies to deal with the complication.
Yeah.
And that's not actually solving the problem. So we take a different approach.
So talk about how you help those customers. And also, you said on stage today, only the terminology, trust by design, simplicity by default.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? And then how are you helping apply that to customer environments?
Right. So the challenge that organizations have had is they built these networks and they had to secure those networks. That's fairly straightforward. But then when you connect the network to the internet, and then when you move workloads to the cloud, and when you move other workloads to SaaS applications, and then people even pre-COVID, but now especially post-COVID, are working from any place. And then you introduce all the devices that are connected to the cloud. Suddenly you have this impossible scenario where your user environment is not simple if you're trying to do that all using the network technologies in order to make those connections. So we have this very simple premise, which is move your security controls off your network and make it independent. Because your network is no longer your private network. Your network is the internet. It's it's a cellular connection.
Any connectivity you have anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So rather than trying to add complexity on complexity to deal with all those permutations and all those, with VPN and with firewalls and with VDI and so forth, you just stop and rethink the whole thing. And so you need a security control that's independent of the underlying transport. And that way transport can do what it does well, simple, high performance, high bandwidth, available every place. And then you put the security controls on top of that and make sure that you have one place to manage your security controls that applies regardless of the network, regardless of the transport underneath, because that's the world that we live in and that's the world that the applications and devices live in today. So that's the simplicity by design.
Yeah, and I think it's really an important shift for companies to make now. During his portion of the keynote, Adam Geller, your head of product, was talking about how AI has moved to agentic, which is creating a bunch of virtual agents. I actually think there's another trend coming, and if you've watched any Jensen Huang keynote from NVIDIA, he talks about the next wave of AI being physical AI, where we're going to have more autonomous vehicles, we're going to have connected this, connected that. I don't really see a path forward for organizations that don't deploy Zero Trust everywhere, because frankly, I don't know how you would secure virtual agents and IoT devices and autonomous vehicles and things like that, because you're not putting firewalls in, right?
That's right. Yeah,
and so I don't even know how that would work.
You have to have a security infrastructure that assumes mobility, it assumes cloud, it assumes that the transport could be anything. From satellite to internet to broadband to all of the above. So you have to have a security approach that sits independently on top of that you can manage effectively and efficiently. And then you move away from these multiple layers of trying to apply policy across routes and networks and so forth. And you have the simplicity of this user needs access to these resources, applications, and data. This device needs connectivity to this application, and you keep it simple like that. And then you can manage that. Now, it's not an easy task, but far more manageable than the old approach of trying to make backwards compatible these old school networks.
Yeah, and how are you seeing companies now? Because I know there's a big focus on trying to align security with boardroom priorities.
Yeah.
And how are you seeing that happening? Are your customers successful here?
Yeah, in Australia and New Zealand, there's been several very high-profile security breaches, and so I think probably every Australian and Kiwi thinks they've had their data leaked.
Yeah,
and that's creating the trust gap. Now, if it's just your email address and name and maybe an ID with that, you might be okay, and people are worried. But I think what they're looking at is, if that's possible, what if they get more? And so that trust gap is really substantial. So the boards understand this. And there's the trade-off between how much do we spend to try to lock down and protect the data and the information and the applications, and how much do we just provide the necessary insurance and the reactiveness? Well, it doesn't take long before that trust gap gets too big and you lose your customers. You might be able to recover in the short term, but if you erode that trust, you can't build a business for the long term. And so that, I think it's moving from how do we just simply make sure we don't have a breach to how do we turn it into a strategic advantage and say that our organization can be trusted with your critical data, with your assets, with your money, your healthcare information, what have you.
Yeah, what's fascinating about the big breaches, I don't want to pick on any companies here, but if you look at the details of some of the big breaches that have happened in the region, if the breach was never on that system of record, right? It was some other thing that got breached, created the back door, user credentials being stolen, things like that. So breaches are going to happen. And in fact, I think one of the fundamental tenets that Zscaler operates on is assume the breach, right? So if you can contain the blast radius of the breach, then in fact, you can withstand the breach and not have all your data stolen. And to me, that if I'm a boardroom leader, this is what I'm thinking about. I understand breaches are going to happen, but I can't have the damage be, something we don't know, or
That's right.
complete unfettered access to my data. Right?
Yeah, you again, if you assume the old approach and you create a trusted network and then you provide connectivity to everything with that trusted network, and then you try to block things internally, et cetera, you still create that issue that if somebody gets in, the technology today can scan all vulnerabilities right away. In fact, there's a famous case in the cyber journals right now about somebody finding, they tried to go through a device, but the endpoint protection stopped it. So they went to a camera. They found a Linux operating system on a camera, and then they got in that way.
Yeah.
And were able to go throughout.
Now, like the big topic of conversation at every conference I go to, of course, is AI, right? And there's security for AI. So how do I secure my AI? But then there's also AI for security.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about Zscaler's approach to both of those?
Yeah. At a high level, I will. The demand is just really exploded. We've seen on the Zscaler platform, customers increase their AI usage by 3,000%, 36 times increase.
Yeah.
So massive increase.
It's not really a surprise, though.
Yeah, it started from a small base, and everybody is starting to use it for a lot of different things. And that's wonderful boost to productivity if it's helping you actually get your work done. Problem is, what data are you putting in to that AI model, and what information are you getting out? Organizations want to be able to control that. So Zscaler's got a unique approach. We can both inline manage the connectivity, which models can you access, which services can you access, and what data can you provide, but also what data comes back, and is that authorized? Because what if somebody asks a question that is not appropriate? Ask a model what their boss's salary is. Now that's not probably too big of a deal, but you might not want to provide that. So you might want to block the request, but you also need to block the response if somebody creates a prompt that circumvents that. So you want to be able to have a full security approach to block it both ways. So that's the basics, and that's what everybody is kind of looking at right now. How do we enable people to use AI models, use them for business purposes, but do it with authorized models and have some level of control on the data going in and the data coming out? The last thing you want to do, for example, is take sensitive data, maybe healthcare data, for example, and put it into a model to write a report or do a diagnosis if that has personally identifiable information. Because if it's going to an unauthorized model, that data is getting out into the wild.
I ever worry about the use case of maybe an investor relations person dropping the financials and saying, create me an earnings script.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty
very common. I've heard about that also, and I'm sure it happens all the time. I need to write my report, maybe even my press release for my earnings call, and a PR person goes and puts the financial information a day before the public announcement. Well, who might have access to that on the back end? If you don't control the models people are using, don't control and monitor the data going in and the data coming out, you expose yourself to that. So that's the basics. And because we're an inline security cloud, we are really well placed to do exactly that for our customers. In fact, one thing we suggest everyone do, if they're a current internet access customer of ours, just turn it on. We'll work with you to do a proof of value, and you can see what's actually happening. And we've done that for many customers, and they found out we know now exactly whether we need to act, and usually why we need to act, and then can take that to the executives and get the justification. But that's the more straightforward problem. There's another one that's brewing that you alluded to, which is the Agentic AI, where these agents will actually act as actors to go
as a decision maker.
Decision maker, perform tasks. So Zscaler thinks of those as very similar to a user. They're just resources that are making decisions, they're accessing data, they're taking actions, or they're producing data. And so we'll treat those essentially as you would any user by wrapping the security controls around them so that they can act with access data that they're authorized to access. They can provide input and output that they're authorized to do, and they can connect to resources, data sets, and applications that they're authorized to work with.
Yeah, and what about the other side of the AI coin? That's using AI to make your customers' operational job easier.
Yeah, we obviously have a tremendous amount of data that...
Because you even mentioned that setting up Zero Trust everywhere can be complicated. I would think that AI would dramatically simplify. Yeah.
Well, let's take the policies, for example.
Yeah.
When somebody wants to manage their data security policies, They often go into a conference room and they whiteboard out all the things they know they need to block, credit card numbers and personal identifiers and whatever sensitive data. And then they create a catalog, and then they put that catalog in place and they turn it on, and then it blocks things that actually are valid business activities. And so then they have to back off the policy, and it becomes this painful iteration. And it stalls people from taking action, actually, because they're so worried about, well, you don't want to block legitimate business activity. So we have a better approach. Turn it on, let AI and ML analyze the trends and make recommendations. There's some things that are obvious. You want to block it. Go ahead and block that. But then use the AI to make recommendations and categorization. We use that approach for data security. We also use it for user and resource segmentation. So we turn it on. You see what logical routes are being used, which people are accessing which applications and which data sets, and which applications need to access which applications. And you can build your policy based on that analyze behavior using AI and ML. So that's a way to supercharge productivity on what has traditionally been very complicated tasks.
Yeah, and it's funny because I talked with Hang about this too, that everyone's paranoid that AI is going to take jobs.
Yeah.
Right. When I look at the data out there, though, that there are millions of security jobs unfilled. So if I can use AI as that virtual assistant, and I can use that to help me, replace some people. In fact, now I can close that skills gap that's right. happening in security.
Nobody in IT has ever said there's a shortage of work to be done.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to say, well, if we can supercharge our productivity, will we hit that point? Maybe.
Yeah,
but I don't think
anytime soon.
I don't see security and those types of functions right now as being the ones that are going to be at risk in the short term.
Yeah.
Long term, who knows? But in the short term, I think the supercharging of capability for threat hunting, for vulnerability management, for recommendations on policy, that'll just make what's right now a very challenging job a lot more effective.
I'll long be retired when a security professional says, I don't have anything to do.
That's likely the case.
Now, you had some great customer examples on stage about customers that have embraced this concept of zero trust. Can you just walk through a couple of those?
Oh, yeah, we got EML, for example. Yeah. They had this AI situation. They wanted to use AI in their business to supercharge productivity of the employees. And so they wanted to make sure they could protect their employees effectively, protect the data while still getting that benefit. So they put the AI capabilities in place in order to manage that access so they could get the benefit with a low friction way to apply the security controls needed so they didn't provide the wrong data to the wrong models and potentially get bad results back. So that's one area where we see tremendous impact on a business that's really pushing the boundary on how to use AI to supercharge their capabilities. Another one is John Holland, construction organization. They have hundreds of sites, and people have to work on site. They have to work in remote locations, and so they're using that technology to provide secure technology or secure connectivity, even when the network is unpredictable, because it could be a 5G network, could be a satellite link, could be the corporate network, could be the internet. And so all of those capabilities are enabled so that they can get the work done in a very complex operating environment.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. And I think the construction one I find fascinating too, because that's not typically what you think of as a network heavy environment.
Yeah.
But I was saying this to somebody the other day, there is no such thing today as a business that doesn't have a mission critical network.
That's right.
Right. And so everything's connected all the time. And the question is, how do we secure that? So,
if you're building critical national infrastructure, you're going to want to protect your plans. You want to protect your data. You want to protect your entire business.
Yeah. All right. Last question for ANZ. Well, it doesn't have to just be ANZ-based companies, but for companies out there that are thinking about their digital first strategies, a couple of pieces of advice you want to give them.
Digital first strategies. Well, one, you want to think of cybersecurity as, and this is an adage used in the industry for quite some time, you want to think about it as the brakes to your race car. And the purpose of those brakes is so that you can go faster, but do so securely. And so if you're thinking about a cyber strategy, you want to make sure that you've got the right controls in place to enable your business to do what they need to do, but also guarantee that, or at least assure that protection. And so, thinking through a different approach from what is no longer working in the past in an environment that's completely changed, you got to start with a cloud first, mobile first mentality.
Yeah, in fact, several years ago, one of your customers said to me at a chat, it was a US-based Zenith event, he came to Zscaler because he said, my security strategy wasn't working, hasn't working, and wasn't ever going to work. And so he knew he had to try something different.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the concept of zero trust everywhere is different, but in this era of connected everything, and you think about it, every company is now, their environment is more dynamic, right, and more distributed. And so if your security strategy can't adapt to that, then you're standing still or going backwards.
That's right.
Yeah. So
I mean, I'll make one final point that builds on that. You know, if you're covering 98% of your business and only 2% is exposed, you might think that we're doing pretty well. You have to flip that thinking. You said earlier, you have to assume that you're breachable, and you have to build resilience and capability in your environment to ensure that you're covered. And very often we see people say, well, we rely on that vendor security, we'll rely on this, and they leave a supplier or a B2B connection or a consumer API open. Those little things become, or a camera, a security camera, like we talked about earlier. Those things actually become the vector of threat. And once they get in, if you're using traditional network-based approaches, lateral movement's going to happen. And so rethinking that approach so that you can be simple by design.
Yes.
You can then be trusted by default.
Yeah, well, I love that. Trust by design, simplicity by default.
Yeah.
All right. So
goes both ways.
Yeah. All right. So I'll leave you with that. So Eric, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
On behalf of Eric Swift, GM for ANZ, for Zscaler, I'm Zscaler Valor from ZK Reach. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button and give us a like, and I'll see you next time on the next episode of ZKast.